Ultimately, there are only two differences between the Porsche 718 Spyder and 718 GT4. And as far as I can work out, there are only two questions you need to ask yourself and answer to help you decide between the two should you be in the market to buy one of them. But before we talk about those two differences and answer those two questions, I think it's most helpful to start with talking about what's the same between the 718 Spyder and 718 GT4. You see, this is where I think a lot of people find most of the confusion, especially if you're familiar with Porsche's Boxster and Cayman line. You see, prior to the 718, the 981 version of the Boxster Spyder and Cayman GT4 were very different. In those two cars, the GT4 was Porsche's GT department product, and the Spyder was, in essence, a Boxster GTS with a little bit different bodywork and a better engine. And speaking of that engine, even though it was the same engine in the GT4, it was detuned by 10 horsepower. Why? I don't know, other than maybe just to put it in its place a little bit lower than the GT4. And it's the same story with the chassis and wheels and tires and brakes. You see, the Spyder got 911 Carrera S brakes, but those were not the same as the GT4's. And as far as the wheels and tires goes, the GT4 got wider wheels and stickier rubber on it. Again, more of a track-focused GT product. And the Boxster was kind of left to be more of a cruising type car. Now, there's nothing wrong with those differences, and the Boxster Spyder from 2016 was a fantastic car. I actually got a chance to drive one. It is a great car. There's nothing wrong. That's not necessarily saying anything negative between those two, but for this previous generation of Boxster Spyder and Cayman GT4, the differences were the GT4 was for someone who wanted outright performance and the best they could get, and the Spyder was for someone who just cruised around and wanted to put the top down and a bit more comfort oriented. However, for the 718, Porsche finally decided to hand off both cars, the Spyder and the GT4, to Porsche's GT development department. Underneath the bodywork, both cars, the GT4 and the Spyder, are completely identical. Now, for the 718 variants, there is no difference between the wheels, the tires, the brakes, the suspension. Everything is exactly the same underneath. Now, I've had a few comments in the past on some of the videos I've made before where people still think that the 718 Spyder is a softened version of a GT4, or it doesn't have all of the goods from a GT4, and that simply isn't true. And just to help illustrate that point, if you check out the links in the description below, there is a Porsche newsroom article when the car was released, literally stating exactly that for the 718, the cars are exactly identical. So the short answer to that question is everything under the bodywork is exactly the same. Now, since we've got that out of the way, let's go ahead and talk really quick about the two things that are different between these cars. So since we just established that everything under the car is the same, the only differences at that point are the roof and the rear wing. Those are the only differences between a 718 Spyder and a 718 Cayman GT4. Now, I know those things can make a difference. Obviously, as far as driving dynamic goes, the GT4 still is going to be a tiny bit edgier than a Spyder. Anytime you take the roof off a car, you're cutting out strengthening materials, you're cutting out chassis supports and bracing, extra bracing, and so inevitably it's going to be a tad bit softer. I assure you most people will probably never be able to tell those, but that is a difference. And then also the Cayman GT4 has a big rear aerodynamic wing, which makes a substantial difference on big tracks. When you start driving at high enough speeds, that rear wing is not there for looks. It really does make a big difference. So a roof and a wing, if someone asks you, those are the only two differences between those cars. Which leads to the two questions that I think you should ask if you're in the market between buying a Spyder or a GT4. If you can answer these two questions, then you should know exactly which one you're gonna buy. And they're very simple questions. The first one is, do you like convertibles? There are some people who just don't like convertibles. I'm like that most of the time. I had a C7 Corvette and a C5 Corvette. I would never buy a convertible version of either of those cars. I don't like them. They're not bad cars, I just don't like them. It's only when you get into high-end exotic cars, Ferraris and Lamborghinis, that I tended to start liking convertibles. Now, for me, personally, this was one of the reasons on a recent video I made on why I bought a 718 over a 911, but I think the Spyder's top design looks fantastic. I love the way this convertible looks, which is why for this one I made an exception and I wanted a convertible. Because I wanted a convertible after answering the second question, which is, do you plan on tracking the car? Basically, is this car going to be for track use, for HPDE track days, autocrossing? Or is this going to be for pure driving enjoyment, fun on nice days on public roads? That makes a big difference, because if I were choosing one of these cars to do track days in, I would 100% without question pick a GT4. Hands down, period. I wouldn't even think about it. Just for the safety aspect of having the roof. The extra performance from the wing is cool, but it's mostly the safety aspect. I know that this car is great out on a track, but if you're going to pick between the two and you know you're going to be doing it for track use, I would want that extra security knowing that I have metal over my head as opposed to this really thin, flimsy, uninsulated top. So if you plan on tracking the car, to me it's a clear winner that I would have a GT4. Unless you answered number one, that you really love convertibles. If you really want one and you can still track the car, there's nothing wrong with tracking it. That's just what I think for the safety aspect of it. But if you like convertibles, go with the Spyder. If you're going to track the car and that's what you're focused on, pick the GT4. It's really simple. That's all you need to know. And with that, thanks for watching. If you're new to the channel, make sure you like and subscribe down below. If you have any questions about anything, leave them in a comment below, and check out my channel for more videos on the 718. Hopefully I'm going to be making more content with that to come with the exhaust. This car needs an exhaust. Whether you get a GT4 or a Spyder, they both need an exhaust. Hopefully I'll be coming out with one of those soon. But until then, I'll catch you guys in the next one. Thanks for watching.